Right, greetings, hello. It's Thomas Daffin here for my Sunday broadcast, as it were, to the world and to my friends and colleagues and so on. Anyone that finds these talks, I hope they're useful. It's a Sunday, 23rd of August here, coming up to the end of summer, God forbid. But it's, still beautiful and warm here in France, and so I'm going to be running through a few issues to do with world affairs, as I normally do. And I'm going to be making some philosophical comments on them as a philosopher and historian, intellectual and peace activist, peace thinker. So what have I been up to this week? Well, just a few things in summary, exciting. I mean, here we are all still on lockdown, so one has to participate in events through Zoom and so on. It's, very little going on in face-to-face terms, but it was just a few days ago as my normal Wisdom Council gathering. It's a gathering of spiritual and intellectual elders from all over the place, mainly North America in fact, but there are others who take part, and it's a very interesting group evolving. We're looking at spirituality and consciousness, but then we're looking through about 10 other domains and what can be done. It's thinking through the steps we need to take as a planet, and it's there's some really amazing people involved in that group, so hopefully it'll lead to some pragmatic developments. I suggested that we need a kind of map of consciousness, because each spiritual tradition, I'm sitting here in Polyhymnia, these are my Buddhist books behind me, they have a very detailed, specific map of what consciousness is. And I think of all the great spiritual teaching traditions, it created perhaps the most sophisticated of all maps of consciousness, both in the Theravadin schools, but also later in the Mahayana schools. And so, what is consciousness and how can you map it? And how can you map it in the human form? Where does consciousness come into incarnation, so to speak? And how does that correlate with brain structure and discoveries about physiology? Every religion has a kind of subtle physiology to do with chakras. The Buddhists have a similar thing. And different schools have different numbers of chakras. The Buddhists tend to go with 5, but some of them have more. And you'll see pictures of great, Buddhist sages with their multi-dimensional bodies and their many hands. Really, I think these artists are trying to paint the subtle body. And you'll see them with, like 10, 20, domains above their normal mind. They're trying to paint the cosmic mind of a Buddha. Those are normally Buddhas that they're painting. And of course in Mahayana Buddhism there are 10,000 times 10,000 times 10,000 Buddhas in all different parts of the universe. And so how do you draw that? How do you paint that? What are the maps? So anyway, that's what I'm suggesting we work on. And then in the Jewish tradition of the Kabbalah, you have another map, the Sephirot, the 10 Sephirot that make a tree of life diagram, which are extremely detailed, complicated, profound diagram, mapping consciousness, at least as old as the Zohar, but as old as Judaism itself and as old as Israel. Interesting observation that the religion of Israel is not actually Judaism. The word Judaism refers to the religion of the tribe of Judah, which is only one of the 12 tribes. And Isaac Luria, who was a great Kabbalist and an exponent of the Zohar, he said that heaven has 12 gates, each one for one of the tribes of Israel. I like that saying. He was quite a clever chap, old Isaac. And so what is the tree of life, and how can we access it, and so on. So you can study the Kabbalah, as I've done for years, and it's a complicated but profound mapping cartography, if you want, and it overlaps with, say, the Buddhist cartography. And then in Hinduism you have the all the great yogic practitioners and their maps of consciousness, and the chakras in the body. There tend to be 7 in the Hindu system, and then there are complications. There's the different nadis and the different Ida and Pingala going up Sushumna, and the whole Kundalini fire ascension, descension, journeying, and all the petals of the chakras are all described. So that's another kind of map. In what sense do they actually exist, or are they just imaginal? Well, those are the kind of questions we're looking at as a group, and then Sufism has its own mapping, and the latifas of Sufism again describe the nodal points of consciousness, which every aspirant on the path back to God, because we come from God and we go back to God, but to go back to God you have to activate all these latifas, these nodes of consciousness, and your spiritual teacher, your peer, or your Quran. I mean, you can do it just by studying the Quran, in my opinion. If you listen to my commentary on the Quran, there's a how to get to God. The Quran's enough, actually. And Islam is quite clear that you don't actually need gurus. You don't have to pay millions of pounds to people to kind of activate stuff that's in you anyway. That was the point of the Quran. That's why Muhammad brought it down for us all to wake up. And it's there in all the other scriptures too, as I've made plain in my commentaries on the Upanishads, the Dhammapada, the books of Enoch, the Druid texts, and so on and so on. Okay, so that's what we're doing. That's that group, the Wisdom Council. That's just a tiny little glimpse of it. Fascinating stuff. Thank you very much. It's organised by Satyen Raja, who's a great Canadian activist for truth, a truth activist, if there is such a thing, a wisdom activist. And it's come out of his Warrior Sage project, which is really how can we retrain the warriors of the planet to become sages. As a Druid, this is something, that's why I didn't become an army chap or a general. I've known generals, I've worked with people in the army who've worked at senior level. And but it's frustrating being a warrior, because you have to do what other people say. It's the whole thing as a hierarchy obedience chain. Well, what if the guy telling you the orders is actually a crook, corrupt, or immoral? Yeah, and that's the problem. That was the problem faced by decent German soldiers when they were told to do Operation Barbarossa, because the orders they were given were immoral and illegal. They were told not to apply the Geneva Convention to any prisoners they caught, whether Soviets or local people they rounded up, and they started doing the mass extermination of the Jewish population of Eastern Europe, against all rules of warfare and all ethics. Yeah, so, that's why I'm not a soldier. I'm a intellectual activist for truth, like Satyen. And so we're looking at how we can retrain the warriors to actually put the conscience back in, the missing ingredient, because that is what makes us human. I mean, it's very interesting. They're now trying to create robot warriors that will just drop bombs. Warfare has become so mechanized and robotized that you don't need to factor in a conscience into the drone. It just does it if you push the button. But the guy pushing the button still has a residual conscience, one hopes. The trouble is that, Assange, who exposed the lack of conscience of some of these drone warriors, is now languishing in a jail in London for trying to actualise the conscience button for humanity. As I've said before, he should be given a knighthood and released, and it's shocking what's been done. What's been done to people like Assange is the robot warriors who've taken over now politics. And the way they've done it is with weaponising social data, social media, Facebook and so on, deliberately and consciously, as Chris Wiley exposed, having glimpsed what's going on behind the scenes. These are the robot warriors of without conscience. And they've now stolen British democracy in their Facebook madness, and have no conscience about it. So that's what we're up against. So we have to retrain the cyber warriors as well as the drone warriors, as well as the, all levels of the military that are making unconscionable decisions. Right now in Gaza, I think there's more bombing going on, more dropping of bombs on Gaza, and the people of Palestine are trying to send balloons over. I mean, it's a lopsided, unfair contest, and it cannot be solved militarily. I mean, but unfortunately, Israel doesn't seem to have. I think Netanyahu's missing the conscience gene and his advisors, which is sad because the whole point of Israel was it was born out of the revulsion and conscience of the world at the horrors of the Holocaust. And it is a nation born out of conscience. So it has to actualize the conscience gene within itself and realize that the Netanyahu prescription for peace is actually just an eternal, endless war scenario. And it's only by the skin of our teeth that we don't have Israel dropping bombs on Iran and letting fly World War III, which is, Netanyahu would love nothing more than that, as far as I can tell. I mean, I've not met the man, but his speeches are belligerent, his attitude, his policies are belligerent. And they have been ever since 9/11, when I believe the man was in New York, strangely enough, and was boasting like a day after, this is great news for Israel, Yeah, it's that tells you where we're at, okay? This is not good news for anyone that loves Israel. These continual wars with Palestine, they have to be resolved. I've actually taken the Trump-Netanyahu peace document. I've looked at it seriously. I've done a commentary, and I published it this last week. It's available through my publishing house. You can get a copy and see what I've said. I think it's the basis for some discussions between Israel, Palestine, and a neutral external body such as the European Union, the UN, etc., etc. Britain, and Russia. I mean, we all we all have a investment in getting peace between Israel and Palestine, and also all the other neighbours like Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and so on. I'm an advocate for an inclusive peace of the Middle East, and that's why I chair the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East, and want to see security for all Israelis, all Palestinians, and all Lebanese, all Syrians, all Jordanians in my lifetime, like tomorrow, by the end of the year, please. But at least the Trump-Netanyahu plan was at least something on the table. I've gone through it with a fine-tooth comb. I think there's about 10% that's salvageable and is worth preserving and doing. Maybe a bit more. Some of it just has to go because it's not acceptable to Palestinian people. And okay, so that's that. Also, just a different thing, but something else I've been doing yesterday is taking part in a wonderful bardic fest, which is inspired by my friend Cavan Mannering, who's one of the great bards of British culture. He's a poet, an academic, and a storyteller. He gave performances at the Castle of the Muses when I lived in Scotland. He loves going for long walks and pilgrimages, and he's trying to revive the pilgrim trails of the old ancient Celtic, Druid, bardic world. And he organised a great bunch of speakers yesterday from Avebury, where he lives. We had some Druids from Avebury, we had people from Ireland, from America, from Canada, from all over the world. Bards are not restricted to just one culture. There are bards and poets in every culture. There was a wonderful eco-poetess called Helen Moore from Frome, who's done some wonderful work. She read some of her poetry, very impassioned and dedicated young poetess. And we had Kimway from Devon, who was the grand bard of Exeter, who read some lovely poetry and did some music. She's been on radio Devon a lot during the lockdown and is recording, I think, every week a poem about what it's like existentially to be in this condition, this lockdown type thing. And we had Charlotte Hussey, a poetess from Montreal, where I was born, and beautiful Canadian sensibility there. We had the Druid, the Archdruid of Bath, Richard Carder, reading some of his poetry. He's a passionate peace thinker, peace activist, and he knew Tim Sebastian, who was the Archdruid of his order that was part of the Council of British Druid Orders that I sit on as the peace officer, and Tim and I worked together, for quite a few years, along with Rollo and Arthur and all the others. And of course they all kept falling out all the time. That just goes with the territory. But Richard seemed like a very sensible chap, and his poems are about water. And I worked with a woman called Margaret Stewart to get a water academy going in Bath. I still think this project should be done. And so I'm going to be working with Richard, hopefully, to try and actualise that. And Margaret Stewart seems to have vanished off the radar, but anyone who spots her, please ask her to get in touch. The world, we still need our water academy in Bath, thank you very much. Because the officialdom doesn't do it. The officialdom, conventional academia, conventional scientists, are not aware of the full complexity and beauty and sensitivity of water. It takes druids and bards to understand that. And then similar, we had great talks. Peter Please speaking about his experiences in the Scottish Highlands, and then finally we finished with a brilliant talk by an Icelandic storyteller, effectively Svanur Thorkelson, who spoke about what the rainbow, what the Northern Lights are like, and he described them, and as a child seeing them for the first time, and why the people of Iceland love them so much. And as he was describing them, he was saying that they don't occur in Icelandic literature until quite recently. And it occurred to me that I think that's probably wrong. I think what he was describing, I've seen the Northern Lights vaguely in Scotland, where you can just sometimes catch glimpses. But I've never seen them full on, as in Iceland, where they're crackling overhead. But they have a sort of shimmering effect, like a kind of curtain blowing. And it sounded to me like Bifrost, the bridge that connects us back to the gods, Asgard. And they do have a sort of rainbow colour effect in them. And although Bifrost is normally associated with the rainbow, the thing is there are so many rainbows. There are rainbows like all the time. Whereas those Northern Lights are quite rare, and it takes a lot of resolve to see them. And it seems to me that the path to Asgard is not actually as common or as easy as the rainbow. I mean, where I lived in Scotland, Loch Goil, there was a rainbow virtually every day because it rained at least 1 or 2 hours every day, apart from, I think, 4 days of the year. The sun was a less frequent visitor, but occasionally it would come out, and then you get these spectacular rainbows on the loch. And all over Scotland there are rainbows, and in other parts where I lived around Welshpool, in the Great Severn Valley there, you get amazing rainbows in Wales because it rains also a lot there, and so sun, when it comes out, you get huge rainbows, double rainbows. Here in France you get them quite a lot from my little part of paradise, La Creuse. So I think the rainbow is almost too common. I don't think all of these rainbows are ways to Asgard, or we'd all be off by now. Who would be here if you could be in Asgard, Valhalla? No, I think Bifrost is the path to the gods. It's much more difficult of access. But anyway, that was just a little aside. Discuss. And we had Cavan Mannering reading some of his work. It was a brilliant event. So well done to Cavan for organising it all, bringing us all together. May the bards carry on, is all I can say. It's really important that the bardic tradition survives, thrives, and brings hope and inspiration to people, because we work with Arwen, the muse, and you see, normal knowledge is fantastic, we all love it, science, horizontal stuff, and it's all mathematically based and you can quantify everything. Poetry works at a totally different level, so does authentic prophecy and musing. It works where the vertical and the horizontal meet. It brings the vertical into the horizontal. From Christian parlance, that's the symbolism actually of the cross. That's what it means, is when, as it were, the divine enters history. Okay, that's a visual representation of it. And that's why many Celts and bards became Christian, because they recognised, this is, the divine coming into history. I mean, it's not every day you do a supernatural, resurrection, is it? That Arwen is still important, the inspiration, and it mustn't be lost from our schools, our education work, and so on. I pointed out that on the Council of British Druid Orders, I've initiated with other colleagues an education group for the Druid and Bardic community, and it should be on every Sacre's religious studies curriculum, in my opinion, where I've taught for many years. And it's the indigenous poetic and cultural tradition of Britain and Ireland, and of course it should be there. It is there in Oxfordshire and I think in Cornwall, but it ought to be everywhere. And the whole poetic tradition of English literature and Welsh and Irish literature, Scots, should be celebrated, and I think that the English curriculum should be extended so that every English school kid learns a bit of Welsh, a bit of Irish, a bit of Gaelic, a bit of Scots, and they all have to learn English in Scotland and Wales. It's compulsory. Well, I think, with all due respect, the English should learn a bit of Irish, just the alphabet and a few basic terms, and something about the literature, so they have more respect for the people they share the island with. And then Brexit stuff would never have happened, because Brexit is all a monstrous idea, hyped up by English nationalism as a sort of hubris. It's a hubristic project, because it doesn't appreciate the depth, beauty and wisdom of the Celtic soul and their literature, which was ancient before the first Anglo-Saxons ever stepped a foot on the islands. There was literature in Ireland going back to the Bronze Age, and in Wales too, and that's where we know the names of all these Celtic gods and their legends and stories, preserved in writings like Geoffrey Keating in Ireland and other Bardic and Welsh and Irish traditions, the Taliesin stories, the Emergin stories. These should be known in every English school in England. Somebody should put them on the curriculum of the English lessons, because it's part of English literature, because this Celtic tradition has inspired and made English literature what it is. The great Romantic poets, the Wordsworths, Coleridges, the Blakes especially, all absorbed from the Celtic soul. Yeats, obviously. You can't make sense of English literature without knowing Irish, Welsh, Celtic literature as well, and their pantheons and their languages and literatures. And also, it's where Christianity came to the English from, through the northern route, from Columba to Northumbria, Lindisfarne, and the whole of that sort of northern part of England, down to Mercia, Lichfield. They were all evangelized from Columbian, from St. Columba and the Iona tradition, indirectly via Lindisfarne. So it's part of the Christian heritage as well, and the amazing Lindisfarne Gospels and the complexity of the art shows how the Celtic mind works. It can see the multi-dimensionality of everything, and that's why their poetry and their R.S. Thomases and their Dylan Thomases are so rich, because they can evoke in words the multi-complexity of existence. One pilgrimage to Bardsey, by the way, is quite worth doing in your life. If you haven't done it already, go to Bardsey on a summer day, sit on the top of the mountain in the middle, and just be in awe of the incredible beauty around you. That's the Celtic Enlightenment. It's affirming the beauty of the divine in this world, as R.S. Thomas says in his poetry. The bright field, it's that moment when the sun breaks through and everything is forgiven and everything is understood. Thank you. That was the Bardic Fest, and rich and wonderful it was, and thank you to everyone that took part, and to Kevan for organising it. I only said a few things, and I said a thing at the end. I did an improvised channeled poem, like an Arwen poem, which I think went reasonably well. I have this capacity as a poet to tune into spirit and pluck a poem out of the ethers. Anyway, it was recorded. I can't remember them afterwards. It's like a thing of the moment. Yeah, it's like going into almost like a little trance and plucking it from the ethers. I've also been in touch with India in my other hat as the World Intellectual Forum coordinator for Europe. To me, there's a link between the bard, the druid, and the intellectual. And in Ireland, in the Celtic world, intellectuals are treated quite seriously. Here in France, they are. In the robotic, warrior-run society of England, in the post-Brexit nightmare, intellectuals, are in short supply, sadly. And but I think they will make a comeback. I think they've just gone into the woods. They've joined Robin's Greenwood, gang, and a lot of them have turned eco. I think the intellectuals are there, biding their time in the woods, and will come back. We're going through a lean time. It's like, that's why Robin Hood had to take to the woods. So my own work as an intellectual here in France, working with people in India, the World Intellectual Forum continues. We're about to do a webinar that will be recorded with an Indian group called Trans Brahma, which is an Indian-based thing. The World Intellectual Forum headquarters is in Hyderabad, so it'll be great to collaborate. And there's some amazing thinkers in India, as you probably know. I mean, it was Indian philosophy discovering that made me, like Heidegger had a turn, so my turn was to look at India and Indian philosophy. And it's deep, deep, profound stuff. Not just Buddhism, but Jainism and all its complexity, and Hinduism and all its complexity. And then the fact that it's given rise to Sikhism as well, and a lot of Sufism came from India. So I think the world owes India a huge thank you. Today is the day of Akbar here at the Museum of the Muses in prayers, which we do every day. Today we commemorate Akbar, who was one of the first great intellectuals who wanted a reconciliation of all the religions of India. He didn't want this or that one to be privileged, and he himself married a Hindu wife, and she taught him the wisdom of her culture, and he knew Jains, he knew many Sufis, and it was him that gave the land to build the Sikh temple in Amritsar. And I've been to Amritsar, I've been onto the island where the great golden palace of the Sikhs is. That was Akbar's gift, because he knew the Sikhs were onto something, and that they were going to bring a new vision into India. So more of that, please. More of that visionary joined upness of all the religions. That's what India stands for. And I lament if India fails to realise that. I've been to the study of Nehru in Delhi, where he lived. He was a great prime minister. And although, of course, he made mistakes, everybody does, but his heart was in the right place. He was a great friend and colleague of Mahatma Gandhi, of course. I worked for several years with the Gandhi Foundation in London, in the rooms where Gandhi was based when he came to London. And anyway, when I went to Nero's office, his study, it's full of Buddha statues. It's full of, like my place here, He had the same Buddha statues on display as they were sitting looking at him as he was writing his reports on how to govern India. So he tried to be guided by Buddhi, which is the word for intellect. Now, Jains say there are 4 types of intellect, and they have names for them, and they've analysed them. It's not just one thing called intellect. No, there's a whole variety. Aristotle said there's something called nous, which is the immortal bit of us. That's intellect. Abelard, who was an Aristotelian Christian, said intellect's fine, but as a noun, it's only serviceable up to a certain point. It's the verb, the action of intellecting, that's important. And he wrote an amazing treatise that I've only ever seen once in the Vatican Library on how to do intellecting. I love Abelard's genius of thought, which created the University of Paris, which in turn generated Oxford and Cambridge and the European universities. So we need to start doing intellecting again as a planet and as a human civilization and as people. We seem to have lost the art of intellecting. We do positional thinking and oppositional thinking, where I take position X against you, position Y, and we fight it out. We go on social media and nobody's any wiser, you know. We need to do intellecting, and that means looking at all perspectives. What the Jains say, when you get the fourfold intellecting going, it's like playing four-dimensional chess, right? You look at every single possibility of every single choice, and you look at all the possible outcomes, and then you refine them as to which is the least violent outcome. Brexit, no, actually it's extremely violent. It could kickstart violence in India, it could kickstart wars between England and Scotland in 100 years, it could kickstart wars between Britain and Europe, it can kickstart economic meltdown between the poor and the very rich, so we're going to get civil wars, we're going to get riots. I mean, it's the worst outcome for violence is Brexit. So the Jain thing, no, the four intellects look at proposition Brexit and reject it. And they look at the other proposition, which was EU reform, staying in and changing it for the better, and that is the much less violent way. So you do that. So that's called intellecting. And that's what I'm, working with. So if anyone wants to join and get intellecting with us, please join the World Intellectual Forum. Look at the website I've designed for Europe. It's called World Intellectual Forum, europe.weebly.com. Google that, it comes up. Now I want to talk about something else. I've watched, I've given in and watched the film Plandemic because all my friends were sending it to me saying, you've got to watch this. It's the latest thing. Everyone's watching Plandemic and having an aha moment. And other people are saying, no, it's, been debunked and so on. I want to do some intellecting about this and try a middle way solution. I think it's very important to ask questions about COVID, why we are where we are, how we got here. I think we have the right to know. It should not be just elite knowledge preserved for a small, tiny, bunch of people. We live in a pyramid state where only the top of the pyramid have access to the full knowledge. No, that's wrong. This is a democratic thing. Roosevelt, one of my heroes, president of the US, who really saved the world for democracy, he coined this phrase in his political thinking. He said, liberty of the individual is great. That's been part of the American dream, Western liberal dream for a long time. But Roosevelt wanted liberty for the community as well. In other words, it's a social value, liberty. It's not just a private thing that we all sit in our homes and we're free. No, it's as a community do we have liberty. And that's why things like making Facebook more transparent to, monitoring and safeguarding against. I mean, Facebook is a capitalist tool which benefits from selling time and clicks to anybody, whatever their ethics. So if I was a really evil demon from another planet and I just happened to have trillions in the bank, I could take over the planet entirely by just, buying Facebook time. And I could subvert the morals of all humans alive by just telling them that black is white and white is black. And, inventing stuff like the QAnon thing and plastering everywhere. Well, so that's silly. That's not liberty of the community. That's liberty of the mad to control and take over the world. So there's an example of Roosevelt's philosophy, how liberty of the community works. And the greatest liberty is the liberty to know truth. So that's why I take Plandemic seriously. And I watched a doctor go through it all. Now,